looking at the text messages like, oh.
Thank you again for everybody that's here. We are recording this session. Please, if you have questions, feel free to use the chat. We're monitoring that as well, so we can make sure we get to some of your questions and answers at the end. So in my remarks, I did want to talk about how we know that stress is obviously impacting everyone. It's impacting people who are returning to work, trying to find employment, or just being unemployed as a result of the pandemic. But stress has also have a underlying issue in mental health in the Black and Brown community. So we wanted to talk about a few things, and that is how, as individuals in the Black and Brown community, deal with not just racism, but we're also dealing with a lot of high profile situations going on in the world. Obviously, the death of George Floyd, the pandemic, all the other major high profile cases. It's definitely having a strong impact on psychological well-being of everyone. So we're going to talk about those issues and how they impact you, because it's trauma. And I think what's happening is it's now hiding because of the pandemic, but it's also going to resurface in the workplace. So I'm really excited about talking about this subject matter, because the workforce webinars, the purpose of them, as it states on the slide, is to provide some resources to those individuals who are employed, seeking employment, but in a virtual environment. We see that living through this crisis after crisis in 2020 has taught us, if they taught us anything, it's taught us that we can no longer ignore mental health. We can no longer ignore mental health in the workplace. So today's webinar is going to highlight some trends, some strategies on how employers and employees can deal with this new normal. So I'm very honored that I share this platform with two great presenters. And I wanted to give a little brief introduction. Well, let me get back to the numbers. Thank you. I want to stay on that slide right there. This is a slide I got this from NAMI, and you'll hear from Julia Funk in a minute. But this slide really gave us the big picture for mental health by the numbers. 1 in 5 US adults experience mental illness. I'm a visual person, and looking at these numbers was just alarming to me. 1 in 25 adults experience severe mental illness. Obviously, the demographics are different for each group, but they're still alarming. The next slide is going to talk about the impact it has on the economy. $200 billion is lost in earnings because of the folks not being able to perform at work. 80% of employees have some type of mental health condition that they feel stigmatized if they're in seeking treatment. 8.4 million Americans experience co-occurring mental health and substance abuse disorders. So if this is a very serious matter, I'm very excited that I get to share this platform with some of my sorority sisters, Baltimore City chapter members from Rho Xi Omega, Alpha Kappa Alpha, Sorority Incorporated. So my first presenter I would like to talk about is Dr. Lakita Carter. And she has a beautiful bio, but I shortened it just a little bit. So but I have the highlights. Dr. Lakita Carter is a licensed psychologist in Maryland who specializes in trauma, born here in Baltimore. She went to school at Temple University and also received her doctorate degree, master's degree from Loyola University, Maryland. She is also owns and operates the Institute for Healing, LLC, I Heal, a wellness agency in Owens Mills, Maryland, that specializes in treatment of mental health disorders. And she is a beautiful mother of 4. I have to add that. She finally got that baby girl last year or 2 years ago. Is she 2 now? I think so. All right. And she is also recently named Maryland's Top 100 Women 2021. So I'm just honored that she's found time in her schedule to share her gifts and wisdom with us. We also hear from Monica King. Monica King is a clinical social worker with over 25 years in both school social work and private practice. Currently, Monica is employed as a social worker for Baltimore City Public Schools, I believe, and she's highly sought after to help in everything, program management, organizational design, and she leads her district in multiple projects. She's a national presenter and focuses on emotional intelligence. I always tell students this all the time. It's not about your IQ that matters, it's your EQ, right? That matters. So thank you both ladies for being here this evening to share. So I'm gonna we're gonna get to the panel reflections, and now I'm gonna have Dr. Carter be able to share your screen, if that's okay.
There we go. Hi, everybody, and thank you for sharing space and time with us today. It's a pleasure to be here. I always am willing to support my community as well as my sorority sisters with my talents whenever I can. So I'm indeed honored to be here and share some time with you. So Nicole asked me to talk about mental health in the workplace in particular. And so I want to set, and by the way, sorry, Nicole, that little girl will be 3 in August.
Wow.
Yeah, that went by fast. So I want to sort of take us through some reflections about what we've just been through and what we're still working through, and then talk about how that might impact what you do at work, no matter your field, and then what we can do about it. So I want to start with 2020, supposed to be the year of perfect vision. Anybody remember hearing that? You know, 2020, we're going to see things perfectly. You know, the vision's going to be clear and sharp, and it's going to be so much better than 2019. That's where we were. And we were, most of us were experiencing the onset of a new year the same way we experience any other onset of a new year. Hope, excitement, productivity. We want to be more productive, more insightful. We want more vacations. We want to be more joyful, be more reflective, right? We had all of these hopes and dreams for the new year. So that's what we expected and what we got. So a couple months into the year, we got something different. Our expectations were slightly altered, right? So the pandemic started, and you know, the irony of what's happening is that there are really very few things that are once in a lifetime. You know, people used to talk about marriage as weddings as once in a lifetime events. This pandemic was a once in a lifetime situation, right? So it definitely is something where we had to rely on the historical knowledge that we had, but we also had to make new plans because it's not 1918, right? It's 100 years later, and there's lots of differences between now and then. So what we got, I want to make sure that we are all on the same page about what actually happened and has been happening over the last 15 months. So in 2020, we experienced loss at a large and small scale. We lost over 500,000 souls in 2020. We also had personal loss of family members, some due to COVID, others due to old age or other reasons, not COVID related, but it was still a compounded loss. We also had loss of employment. Many of us lost our jobs, and if we didn't lose our jobs, we might have been supporting someone who lost their job. But even if we didn't, there was, for many people, a fear that they could lose their job, right? So that's definitely loss that we can't forget about. We also lost the connections that we had at work because most of us weren't physically going, a lot of us weren't physically going into work. So the rituals that you had with your coworkers, whether that was eating lunch together or working side by side on a project together, sharing space, we lost that too. Trauma, we had some political, right? So any election season is stressful. It's all you see is commercials about the other person being an awful person for us, right? So any of that is stressful. And then we had the Capitol riots in January. It wasn't 2020, but it was 6 days into the next year. So still compounding on what we experienced over the last 15 months. We had a trauma related to race, so the loss of Black men and women at the hands of law enforcement. peaceful protests that were met with violence, not January 6th, but peaceful Black Lives Matter protests and other protests that were met with violence. So that was some trauma. We had loss of safety and peace within our racial communities. So certainly one could argue that there are certain groups that never had a lot of safety and peace. However, we certainly had a different sense of safety before the onset of the law enforcement killings that we experienced. And that started, around 2012. And, if you think about it, Tamir Rice and Michael Brown and Sandra Bland, those were 2014, 2015 killings. So those are things this is something that we've been experiencing regularly for the last 8 years. That can't be taken lightly, the impact of seeing people who look like us, and people who could be our mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, cousins. That definitely has a major impact on us. We also had our social losses, right? So we couldn't gather in large gatherings or even small gatherings. So that meant that celebrations, graduations, cookouts, impromptu gatherings, all of it cut, plus being on lockdown, so only leaving the house for necessary reasons or important essential reasons, and not being able to visit older loved ones in nursing homes and care facilities was also a loss. And then we have relationships. So we have this, in psychology, we call this a sandwich generation. So the sandwich generation is a group of people who is responsible for the caregiving. They're young enough that they have parents who are still alive, and old enough that they have children who still need to be who are still children under 18. So they're caregiving on both ends of their lives. That oftentimes means that after work, you're visiting mom and making sure she has dinner, and then going home and making sure your kids have dinner, shifting lots of schedules to make sure you can be there for everyone. That's the sandwich generation. And as people get older, they age out of the sandwich generation because their parents pass. So within the sandwich generation, you have virtual learning. I am a victim of virtual learning. Okay, so I went from having a normal work day to having my children knocking on my door while I'm in therapy, telling me that they didn't understand a math problem, right? And sliding notes under my door. So that was incredibly hard for us to manage the multiple roles that we were sort of thrust into. We had very interesting living situations because our partners, our live-in partners, whether they were roommates or romantic partners, also became our coworkers, right? They also became the person that you saw in the lunchroom, which is now your kitchen. They are the person that you saw on your commute, which is down the steps, right? So they became everything for us. In our previous lives, we saw them in the morning, and then we saw them in the evening, and we saw a whole bunch of other people during the day. So we got a break from them. And now they are our social outlets because we live with them, and they're also, they also work with us, even if they're not doing the same job. They might be in the next room. I'm in a group with mothers who are professors. And one of the things that came up in the group is, how do I tell my husband that his work habits are really annoying? I don't want to hear him eating tacos in the middle of the day. Or he talks so loud on the phone, does he realize that I'm right next door? So these are things that we had to navigate, and they compounded. And I'll just say as an aside, one of the things, I was talking to a reporter the other day, and he asked, what do you think has been a really big learning curve that we experienced? And I told him about couples. There's a very high demand for couples therapy right now. And divorce lawyers are also swamped, so I hear. And so I said, one of the things that I think we learned from the pandemic is that love isn't enough. You really need to like your partner. It's just not like, you really need to like the person that you live with in order to be able to tolerate what they do every day when you are with them every day. And lastly, communication. So how do we talk through bumps and lumps? when again, that person is our everything. We're spending all weekend with them and all week with them. They're there in the morning, they're there in the afternoon, they're there in the evening. All of those things were are things that we dealt with, and we took hit after hit after hit, right? We had spikes of the pandemic. 2020 was definitely, it was harder than hard, right? So what we experienced has an impact on our mental health. So then we think about, now we've done all this work to transition to home and telework for many people, but not all. And now we have to re-enter. What would that look like? And how do I navigate that when I'm not comfortable? So one of the things I want you to think about is that it is completely and totally normal for you to be anxious about going back to work. If you weren't anxious about going back to work, I would be concerned. So the only people now, people who aren't anxious to go back to work, maybe because they never left, they never transitioned out. But for people who transitioned out and had and worked from home for the majority or all of their time, or their workday, it would be anxiety producing to go back into a space where you're exposed to the public and many different airborne diseases. So if you looked at the statistics, the flu was almost non-existent this year, right? Because nobody was around each other. It wasn't just the pandemic that we were actually, the rates of the pandemic were also decreasing in the prevalence of the flu. So these are symptoms of anxiety that you're seeing on your screen. All of them are very normal when you are doing something, when discomfort arises in your body and your brain. So that could be sleeplessness, overeating or undereating, stress that you're holding in a particular part of your body. So you might have headaches or a painful jaw, trembling, heart palpitations, sweating, panic even can be associated with anxiety, cold sweats. Sometimes anxiety can trigger depression. So you can start to socially withdraw and feel isolated and start to sort of lose your way in terms of having a normal mood. So there are lots of things that happen when we experience anxiety. I also want to make sure that we're on the same page about anxiety. Everyone has anxiety. Everyone has anxiety. There is one type of person who doesn't have anxiety. Can anybody guess what that person is? One type.
Narcissist?
A narcissist? Nope, they have anxiety. You would think so, but no.
A person that's not alive?
Yes, that's the only one. Dead people have no anxiety. That is the only type of person who doesn't. Even infants, newborns have anxiety. We know that because they cry. Crying means I'm feeling uncomfortable about something. I need hugs, I need food, I need to be changed. I need something, I'm not comfortable. And so I'm feeling some stress, and I alert you that I'm feeling stress by crying. Obviously, as we develop, we get more sophisticated ways of, hopefully, we get more sophisticated ways of alerting people that we are under stress, right? But same experience. So what can we do about that? I have some tips here that I want to share with you, but then the other speakers for today are also going to share some of the tips that they have, and I'll jump back in later. But I want to go over these 4 tips that may be helpful, and they are specific to reintegrating. I'm going to go over these in more depth, but the 4 of them are: ask for what you need, have grace, learn your body and listen to it, and then create a tool belt for coping. So we'll start with ask for what you need. Make your needs known. That's the only way that others will know them. Nobody can read your mind. And it's particularly when it comes to your employers, they are thinking about the good of the group. They always aren't thinking about an individual's situation. I have 28 employees. So I'm thinking about the good of all of my providers and all of my administrative team. I'm not necessarily thinking about the one employee who has, who drives an hour to work and what that might mean for her. right? So I don't know what she needs until she says something to me. This can be done respectfully. That doesn't mean we're demanding. We're respectfully ask for what we need, approach from an inquisitive place. Like, I wonder if it would work if we did this, or is it possible if I do this? And be prepared to hear no. That's a reasonable response to a question, right? That's an option, is no, but also don't bring problems without having done some of the emotional work and the thought work behind solving them. So if there's something, if your employer says everybody's coming back into the office 5 days a week from 9 to 5, and you feel like that's not going to work for you, you can ask for a different arrangement, but make a suggestion. Saying that's not going to work for me probably won't get the best response from an employer who spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get people back. And transition work is very hard. My team is going through that right now. It's very hard, actually, to reintegrate people when you want to make sure that they're still safe. Lots, as you've seen when you go out into the public, lots of things have changed about our physical space. Less tables, less chairs, waiting rooms have less chairs available. Sometimes you have to sit in your car and wait to be texted and come up. Like, all of those plans take some time and energy. So ask for what you need, be okay with hearing no, but make some suggestions that might be helpful. Questions to consider that you might be thinking, like, will I need to be fully vaccinated to return to work? Is my employer requiring that I be fully vaccinated? Remember that there are, depending on your job, there are vaccinations that are required. Healthcare providers are required to have a TB shot unless there's some religious exemption. So there is a precedence for vaccines being required. Will I put myself at risk if I go back to work and I'm not fully vaccinated? That's something you really do have to think about. And what safety measures is my employer going to implement? Asking that, I think, is a reasonable question. You know, when we come back, we were sitting in a shared work environment and there were 12 of us in a conference room. How will that be when we come back? Right? That's a reasonable question to ask. Have grace with yourself and others. I'll say it again, with yourself and others. So I noticed that many times we have two groups of people. We have people who have grace for themselves, but others are held to a very, very high standard. And others who never have grace for themselves. They're the hardest on themselves, and everybody else can just, there's a good reason why they didn't show up or they didn't perform. So having grace with yourself means that you go at the pace that you need to go, especially when it comes to things that you have 100% control over. You have 100% control over your social activities, so go slow. Decline invitations to preserve your mental health. I know for me, my own social schedule, the invitations have ramped up. The graduations, the house blessings that were postponed, they didn't forget about, my friends didn't forget about them. They just said, okay, we're doing them now. And that definitely was a source of anxiety for me, right? Because I don't want to make others feel unsupported by me, but I also want to make sure that I am not returning to the life I had at the beginning of 2020. It was a very fast-paced life that was full of too many social obligations, too many. It's something that I reflected on during the pandemic. So I want to pull that back. I don't want to go back there. Also, when you think about grace for others, consider your employers, your business leaders, and owners. They're anxious about this too. They might not look like it, but they are anxious about this too. And try to assume positive intent, or at the very least, unawareness. So when someone's making a decision, it's usually not to zits you, right? They might not have thought about your specific situation. And so maybe that's your job, is to alert them of how this new policy impacts you. In my old position as a full-time faculty member, my dean used to call it stakeholders. If we're going to make a change, let's ask stakeholders how this impacts them. Let's ask the admissions team how this impacts them. Students, how does this impact you? Professors, how does this impact you? So that at least we know the ripple effect that we might have. Some people are just unaware when they make a change. They have no idea that that means that's an extra 30 minutes of work for you. So assuming that someone's unaware and then gently informing them would be a sign of having grace. Listen to your body, learn your body and listen to it. So I have a question that I just want you to think about. Where do you hold stress? It's important that you understand where your stress pools in your body. For some people, it's a clenched jaw. Others, it's an upset stomach. Some people, they have, stress in their shoulders, right? So learn, like when you are feeling your most stressed, try to figure out where the tension is lying so that you can address that part of your body specifically and alleviate it. So learning your body and then listening to it. You can actually learn when your stress is ramping up if you know where you hold stress, right? Because then if you know where you hold stress, then you'll naturally be thinking, how am I feeling in my jaw? Oh, my jaw feels okay today. So maybe my stress level isn't as high as I'm expecting it to be. And create a toolkit of coping strategies. So coping strategies are things that we do to handle stress, and healthy ones alleviate stress without causing problems. Unhealthy ones alleviate stress, but they cause other problems. So both types of coping mechanisms will help you. They will alleviate stress, but one will cause subsequent problems. So then you need to use your coping mechanism to help you deal with your coping mechanism that didn't help you cope well enough. Not ideal. What does that mean? So here's the list: healthy versus unhealthy. Any healthy, so it could be anything. Obviously, the healthy list would be an exhaustive list. The point is to find something that does not create other problems. So unhealthy is what I'll focus on now. Substance use and abuse is going to create another problem. Gambling in excess is going to create another problem. Violence is going to create some legal problems for you, right? Self-harm is going to create a problem. So you want to try to avoid those. And again, they are coping mechanisms. People absolutely use alcohol to cope. Helps to chill them out. Inhibitions get lower. People absolutely use their coping mechanisms, their alcohol or drugs or sex or pornography. People use lots of things to cope, and they do help in the moment, but they also create other problems. So I want to come back full circle. What we expected, what we got, what we learned. We know we got a lot of stuff, most of which was very difficult to handle. But what we also learned was that when we slow down, we can get some clarity, we can reflect, we can figure out, we can reconnect with hobbies that we used to love, that we just got too busy for. We understand the value of reflection time and meditation time and what we do in meditation, whether that is reading your holy word or just spending time talking out loud to your ancestors or spending time deep breathing. And we certainly learn the value of life, right? We learn that in a number of ways, that life is valuable, that we need each other more than we don't. And no matter how many ways we have to communicate, Facebook, Instagram, blah, 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 we need each other and we want each other. We want to be connected. So we learned a lot through our struggle in 2020. So I'll stop there and let other speakers jump in.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. Whoa, it's a lot. Love is not enough and have grace. So have a lot more notes. Monica King, did you want to share something now before we get to our panelists, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. LaCarta. Thank you, Lakita. When Nicole called me about this forum, I said to her, and I've been saying this to a lot of people, that the next pandemic that we are about to interface with is a mental health one. And you're going to see the manifestation of this collective trauma that we've been in. So I have a self-care philosophy that I live by, and I also have been speaking about this year to parents, to other clinicians, and to teachers and stuff. So I believe that with self-care, the way that we manage and mitigate stress is to incorporate, and Dr. Carter said it, to create a tool belt to cope. So if you create this tool belt to cope, not just cope when you're under stress, but incorporating these things regardless of what's going on. And so what I want to share with you today are some of my little, tricks of the trade, and, of how I have managed stress. Now, I'm going to full disclosure. I am a licensed clinician. I work in the school systems, but I am not beyond stress. I have been impacted by this pandemic. I lost a parent during this pandemic. But I think that perspective is everything. And the power of positive thinking, even when it's very hard to, is also something that you have to keep it at the forefront. So when we're proactive about what we do and we're intentional about it, you would be amazed at the results. So during the pandemic, I came across a application, and maybe I need to share my screen, Nicole, because I actually have it up, because I'm going to want to show people what I'm talking about. Okay. I came across a wonderful app. I'm sorry.
Take your time.
Okay. I want you to pull out a piece of paper and pencil, because I'm going to give you a number of things. Nature relaxation. So this is an app. This is something you can get on YouTube for free. You can also subscribe to it. Replacing your worries with wonder. As opposed to listening to the news, I disconnected from the news, and I would have this playing on the TVs, especially while I was home working. It is HD, it's quality. The music is soothing, it's relaxing. If you don't want to watch a movie, you don't want to watch the news, and you don't want to hear what's going on, you can put this on your TV. You can download it on your phone. It was highly, highly, highly effective. So that's one of the tricks that I wanted to talk about. Now, here's something else. My mother had Alzheimer's. She was an Alzheimer's patient. And so I was in this struggle for a number of years. And I said, okay, Alzheimer's patients go through something called sundowning. And so when the sun goes down, they lose a sense of where they are. And so the Philips, this is called, hold on, Philips Hue lighting system. And the purpose of this is that it uses color to transform your atmosphere for particular mood. And so I actually have this installed in my home. And so I can't believe that this is popping up. I'm not sure if you all are seeing this Norton 360 popping up.
No, we can't see actually your screen at all.
Okay, good. Okay, you can still see the screen with the Philips Hue.
There's nothing on your screen, but we can, it's like red and orange and blue.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm sorry. Wait a minute.
I thought that was a nature reflection.
You know what? Hold on.
I was enjoying that.
I actually was showing you, oh my goodness. I was actually showing you the Philips Hue lighting. Write that down. You can go online, Nature's Relaxation. You can go online for that as well. But the Philips Hue lighting system, especially for those people who suffer with affective seasonal issues or disorders. And so you can kind of create this ambiance that you want in your house. Sometimes people don't want to walk into, bright lights. You want to begin to bring your day down and kind of relax. And so you can adjust the lighting for that. Steam therapy. I belonged to a spa and loved the steam room. And there are benefits. I want you to look up the benefits of steam therapy. 1, it reduces stress. 2, it can treat a headache. It can treat headaches. 3, it can help to detoxify the body. It can improve sleep, and it relaxes the muscles. So I discovered this product called European Spa Source. So when you go to the spa, there's essential oils that they spray in the sauna as well as the steam room. And aromatherapy is very good for the senses. Lemongrass and eucalyptus and jasmine, those sorts of scents are very effective, especially if we are under anxiety, we're feeling a little depressed. So in the morning, I spray the eucalyptus or the lemongrass and the eucalyptus. They have different, combinations, but it's very, very uplifting. I do this every day. And the reason why I'm out is because during the pandemic, I wasn't just spraying once, I was spraying just all in the shower, But, these are the things that if you do every day, you can help to mitigate long-term stress, because long-term stress actually can turn into depression if it's untreated. And so that's one of the tricks of the trades. And of course, candles. Joe Malone, different whatever, lavender, lighting candles, kind of setting that mood in your house. And there's another, I went to Chicago, stayed at the Westin, and I actually have it right here. So they had a beautiful aroma in their hotel lobby. And I said, what is that? So I found out, of course, I had to Google it under the Westin hotel chain. So they actually sell the scent wave machine. You can plug this up and it releases a beautiful aroma. It's the same aroma that they use in all of their Westin hotels. The next time you go into a Westin hotel, take note of the aroma. And so you can get the machine, and the cartridges might last you a month or two, how much, depending on how much you use it. Let me see what else I have. So sometimes I can't get to sleep because I'm too busy laughing at Instagram comedians. And laugh therapy is good for the soul. I do not gravitate to things that are negative, or even things that will make me question my own self-esteem about all of these people with these fabulous lifestyles and girl, bye. You're not. So there are a couple of comedians and a couple of inspirational quotes and just all kinds of beautiful pictures. I laugh at night. And one night I laughed at this comedian up till 2:00 in the morning. I had to go to work the next morning, but laughing is a way of releasing. And so if we continue on that path of searching for things that make us feel good, we'll continue to chase that. And so when negativity comes in your space, you immediately say, you know what, I need to reject that because it doesn't feel good. And negativity in this space that we're in this climate that we're in, definitely is not helping towards depression and anxiety. So Instagram, YouTube, I'm not going to name the comedians. You can just kind of Google it yourself because everybody has different tastes in comedians. Another thing, weighted blankets. I did not believe in the power of a weighted blanket. And so I got one. They said, this thing is really, really nice. It was another school social worker. So I purchased it and then I put it on. And then I said, this thing is heavy. What in the world? So a weighted blanket really works when you're under anxiety. And so there were some times, more than enough during the pandemic, where I was like, I think I need that weighted blanket. And I slept very well. Now, it's not effective if you're not under stress. I'm going to tell you that right now. So that's one of the tricks of the trade, is that, because it actually creates this hugging motion. And so it brings comfort. It's almost like a baby in the womb. One more thing that I am going to mention is think about some things that you do that make you feel good and utilize that. We have to learn to utilize our internal strengths and to release these expectations that we have. Dr. Carter said it. She said 2019 came and we were most positive people. 2020. 2020 was a nightmare, but 2019 was very difficult too. But you don't remember 2019 because 2020 overshadowed 2019. So during December, I decided, because I used to work in a restaurant, I decided that I was going to have at my house in the middle of the pandemic, a 24-hour holiday happy hour for me and my husband. I literally decorated the table. I had hors d'oeuvres. It was literally 24 hours a day, cheese and crackers. So disclaimer, I used to work in a country club. So I know how to set up the tables to look just like you would when you go into a country club or restaurant. Steamed shrimp, crab balls. And so the purpose of it, we were working, but I would put it out in the morning, something different for lunch and something different for dinner. And we would have, wine and the Philips Hue lighting was going on and the disco ball in the back and, but I needed to work very hard not to remind my household that we were in the middle of a pandemic. So what is it that you like? Is it that you like tennis? Do you like basketball? Do you like to run around a block 20? We have to work hard because those are the things that if you incorporate it in your lifestyle 24/7, when we get to times like these, and I'm not saying that I wasn't ever stressed, because one time I was so stressed that I forgot that I had a hot tub sitting in my backyard. Now that's stress. But the point is that zone in on what makes you feel good. Think about that. Develop it as your tool belt. And don't just bring out the candle, because that candle is burning right now. Just don't think about it when you're under stress. Burn your candles every day. Spray your shower every single morning. Do your walk when you come home from work. Deplug from the news, deplug from negative text and the phone. Get into laugh therapy. So those are some of the just kind of and there's many more, but those are some of the tricks of the trades that I engage in to kind of, tell people how to help keep the stress level down. So
Thank you.
I hope that was helpful.
That was very, very helpful. Thank you, Monica. I love to find what brings you joy in laugh therapy. And I think there's oftentimes serious situations happening and I try to find some humor in it because it helps me. I would like to introduce our next two guest panelists. Janetta has served as Janetta Churchill, has served as a volunteer with the National NAMI, where she shares her experiences living with a serious mental health condition. She will share this evening about her experiences navigating the workplace with a mental illness. And Will Hug is a coordinator of International Student Services at Baltimore City Community College, has 26 years of experience in higher education, community outreach, diversity, equity, inclusion, and also Sankofa Children's Museum of African Cultures. And he's also in the regional film and music. My former DJ for my birthday party many years ago, but good friend of mine. I'm excited that both of you guys will share your personal reflections and how you work with folks who struggle with this, particularly students and even yourself. And as you deal with the pandemic, working from home in isolation and mental health challenges. So thank you both for being in this platform. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you both here. Janetta, I'll start with you.
Thank you. I currently work for the state of Maryland as an epidemiologist, and I'm also one of the 1 in 5 Americans who lives with a serious mental health disorder. And it's my hope that by sharing my story with you, I can help remove some of the stigma that exists around mental health conditions, and especially as it relates to the workplace. Some of my background, I used to have a lot of chronic troubles around the workplace. I would have several illnesses and anger issues in the workplace, a lot of conflict with management and my coworkers. in 25 years, I had 12 jobs because every year or two I would quit because of conflicts with management. Even though I was really high performing, I would just get angry and I would quit. I was just the angry Black woman. But in 2004, I had a serious breakdown at work and I ended up going in the hospital. And it was at that time that I got a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. That's when there's times that I feel blue and my energy is low, and that's the depression end of things. And then there are times that I'm really, really high and excitable, sometimes angry or laughing a lot, and that's the mania side. I may not feel like I need to sleep, or I may talk very fast, have racing thoughts, and that's mania. And once I got that bipolar diagnosis, I began treatment with a psychiatrist and a therapist. Over the next several years, I became stable on medications and with therapy. And I began to have much more consistent work patterns. I started staying on jobs, not having as much conflict. I really evened out. Work became a much more peaceful place for me. But I had some challenges getting support in the workplace around having a mental health disorder. When I first went into the hospital that first time, I was in the hospital for a week, and the doctor told me that I needed to stay home an additional 2 weeks to get used to my medication. And my manager at the time told me that he had to know what my diagnosis was. And I was like, I have a doctor's note. That's all you need to know. And he told me point blank, if you don't tell me what your diagnosis is, I'm going to fire you. And I went to the Equal Employment Opportunity, the EEO officer at our job, and talked to her about it. And she came to the manager and said, she does not have to disclose her diagnosis to you. You're actually breaking the law by demanding to know this. And he became very angry and began retaliation against me. He would not let this go. He was like, you have to tell me why you've been hospitalized. And he made it so uncomfortable for me, I left the job. And at that point, I did not have understanding of what my rights were as somebody living with a mental illness, someone who didn't understand that a mental illness is included as a disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act, that I have the right to have reasonable accommodations in the workplace. I didn't have any of that understanding at that time. And I think at that point in my career, I was feeling shame. I was feeling stigmatized. I just wanted to hide this and hide from the workplace. And I was feeling personal shame about it. Fast forward to the current. I last year in 2020 had to go back in the hospital for my psychiatric illness. And I had a much different experience dealing with management. This was with a different employer, with the state of Maryland. And I had to go in the hospital for 6 weeks. And I didn't have to, but I chose to self-disclose to my manager that this was for a psychiatric illness. And I was taking a gamble because I didn't know how this was going to be received. But I was very pleasantly surprised that I received a lot of support. It turned out that my manager, her daughter has bipolar disorder. And she was like, I understand what you're dealing with, and I want to help you. She worked together with me and my hospital social worker to put together a plan for me coming back to work, at first part-time, then full-time. We worked out a schedule so I could come back part-time and not be overly stressed by phasing in my work. She has worked with HR to come up with some reasonable accommodations for me to allow me to have a flexible schedule on the days that I have to go to therapy. So I don't have to use my sick leave. So I have received a lot of support in this workplace. So even though I did not have to disclose my diagnosis, it showed me that I don't have to live in fear and shame about my illness, that I can be empowered, take my power back and use it really to my benefit, so I can take care of myself and still be someone who is a viable employee, knowing that I have something to offer in the workplace. So what are the lessons that I learned? First, I believe that managers need to be trained in how to properly handle staff when they request health leave. And that includes laws around HIPAA, the Family Medical Leave Act. And this isn't just around mental health care, but just around health leave in general. I don't think that management necessarily understands when people need to use sick leave, how to manage that. Second, I think that reasonable accommodations may need to be put in place with human resources to assist with mental health conditions in the workplace. And those reasonable accommodations are something that a worker sets up with human resources, not necessarily, you don't have to disclose your illness to your manager. You have to disclose it to HR, but your manager doesn't have to know that you have depression or you have anxiety. They just need to know that an accommodation needs to be set up to help you with your disability. And employees should not be pressured by their manager to disclose diagnoses or have their jobs threatened. EEO officers or HR should be an ally to help employees navigate their rights, because we do have rights. So if you are experiencing a mental health issue, you should not live in fear of losing your job or feeling that you can't handle or function in your job. You should be able to get the assistance you need so you can bridge that gap between how you're feeling and getting the help that you need. So that's my story I wanted to share today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your courage too. So proud of you, sis.
Thank you.
Mr. Hug?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you again to all the speakers, and particularly Ms. Janetta, because I can only imagine what that was like. And I was going to mention that I was at the Urban League about 20 years ago. I was on a project with an employer there, and I was very excited to work on with a youth project and work. At that time, we were talking about the digital divide, and so I worked in the computer lab, teaching youth and elders, computer literacy. And actually, the employer I was working with fired me because I put in for a FMLA, and the Urban League was one of the few places that knew what I could do and said, well, we know what just happened, and we're going to hire you to run our youth camp and media camp and work with our seniors on computer literacy. So I'm very grateful to the Urban League personally. So just wanted to make that connection between FMLA and my experience at the Urban League, and always very grateful for the work the Urban League does. So just again, I've worked in higher education for 26 years. I've been advising students from high school. I used to teach ESL. I work with returning students who might have started in college and then life happened and they come, students will come back. I've worked with international students for about 18 years, and with teens and elders. We have students graduating at, into their 80s. So part of my job is trying to be responsive and supportive as much as I can. And this past year was very difficult. particularly since the majority of the students I work with are coming from other countries. You know, a lot of those students are very isolated. They've sometimes left all family and friends and support systems behind. They're trying to find healthcare. Their financial, you know, the financial crisis abroad is even worse than here. And so, and they're also trying to make sense of our historic reckoning on racial justice over the past year. Many of the students really just didn't understand the context and the history. And of course, not expecting, none of us, I think, expected the election-related disruptions and violence. So all of that kind of pulled together to make a perfect storm for international students. So as anyone who's worked in a supportive environment, whether it's healthcare or social justice or teaching or being on the front lines, when you're in a helping profession, you have to be at your best. So very quickly in the pandemic, I realized I have to do some things differently for self-care. I'm divorced, I live alone. My children are living either with their mom or at college. And so I had to adjust what I could do to be a better friend to myself. As Dr. Carter mentioned, you know, we lose one of our stages of grief is losing what's normal, what's a normal work environment. So picture being at a community college like BCCC, where you have a vibrant work environment, people are interacting all the time, as with any college campus, but at a community college located in Baltimore, you know, there's a sense of mission and purpose. You know, a lot of us who've been there, our long timers, are there because we really do believe in the difference that education can make, particularly you know, community colleges offer. And so we're being inspired by our students, we're being challenged by our students, and it's very dynamic. Even, you know, going from one appointment to another or walking across campus, you're always, there's always something to interact and to learn and to teach. And so you go from that environment to being at home, and you still have to put out that energy, but there's no energy coming back, you know. If anything, as we all know from Zoom fatigue and other types of being separated from our normal support systems, it's just very draining. And so, you know, it's not any worse or any better. I'm just talking from my own experience. So I did things like being very self-isolated and withdrawing from support systems and even family. And, you know, as Dr. Carter mentioned, you know, that some of us are in that sandwich generation. So even though my children are in college, they still have a lot of needs, particularly this past year was so challenging for one child going into, you know, my daughter going into college and my son trying to finish college and my eldest, you know, going into law school in her first year. It's very hard to give them the support they need without being intrusive. And then my parents and my father being very alone locally, and then my mom being 400 miles away and trying to self-care. So I did things, risky things, like go over and visit my dad, wear my mask. And I traveled down to see my mom a couple times over the past year, which, you know, everybody said, don't do that. But I knew how careful my mom was. I knew how careful I had been. And I took that chance. And in fact, we experienced the death of her elder sibling who's 101. And so that, you know, it's just very tumultuous. So it's kind of like a roller coaster, you know, this whole year, you know, just like grief in general, you go back and forth between being very upbeat and high and giddy, and then to being very low and very low energy and wanting to self-isolate, to maybe snapping at people that you shouldn't, to being giving so much that you lose yourself in the moment. And that's what the roller coaster has been for me. I think it's important, you know, to volunteer. One thing that we haven't mentioned, but obviously we're talking about the Urban League and you know, sororities and fraternities. There are a lot of community organizations. My son and I went and worked on a community organization and giving out food. I got involved in some nonprofits. I was already involved, but I became super involved. East Baltimore Historical Library, Sankofa Children's Museum, Baltimore Sister Cities. I just became super involved in a lot of those causes, and that helped by giving, helped me feel less isolated, and I was actually in a more social environment, even if it was on Zoom. Sometimes I would, listen to music, as we talked about, what makes you feel good. Music, getting back into my exercise routines. I lost 30 pounds, and then I went to visit my mom and I started gaining pounds. I gained 40 again. Now I'm losing, about 15. But sometimes you just have to keep adjusting those formulas. What are you taking in, and what are you giving out, and finding that balance. It goes back to one of my favorite teachers in high school, and I was very active in social justice in high school locally, and I was also a scholar athlete, and I was very religious, and I was doing I had all these balls in the air, and he said, you need to think about balance. You're never going to get perfect balance, but you're going to find yourself spending so much time in one area of your life, in your social life, or in your activist work, or in your religious spiritual life, and that will detract from what you're doing in other areas of your life. And so I learned to have that balance. And when I'm talking to my students, I talk all the time about, finding that balance, and what are you doing. Sometimes you just have to write out a list of the things that you want to accomplish, and then make even a smaller list. Okay, what are things I can do today? I can't reorganize my house or my home, in a week, but I can reorganize this room, or I can reorganize like for me, it's my music collection. For people who love music, I think, other people can relate. My efforts to reorganize start with my music collection. And I used to be a DJ, so that started first. I reorganized my music, and then the other things followed. My clothes, I brought things, to give away at fund drives. And I just became more responsible about food, and not buying too much, not buying too little. I'm a vegan pescatarian, but I was eating junk food, battling depression. Sometimes that's what you do. You go for the starchy things, the chips and soda and all the bad things. Fries are one of my favorite vegan things to have, but it's not a healthy thing to have, right? So sometimes finding that balance between diet, exercise, spiritual life. I got into a book club. It's called Reading is Activism. You can look it up on Facebook. We talk about books by Black authors and of the African diaspora, and it's always very inspirational, to get involved in a book club that has a purpose, whatever your purpose is, whatever you study or want to concentrate on. So I think finding balance, and looking at, and how being acknowledging that we suffer grief in different ways. We go through grief in different ways. And some of us are going to cry, some of us are going to get angry, some of us are going to shout or curse, other people are going to withdraw. And just being honest with ourselves about how we're going to change from day to day, moment to moment, and expect that roller coaster, see the signs as they start coming on, and then adjust.
Good.
So I think I've eaten up enough airtime. I want to give it back to the group. Thank you for your patience.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Appreciate that. Dr. Carter, I think we're coming back to you, and then we'll going to close with Julia Funk, and we'll launch the poll. Okay.
Yes. So I just want to point out that the reason that I call coping mechanisms a tool belt is because of a Japanese proverb that I once heard. When you are a hammer, you see every problem as a nail. And so the goal is not to have one coping mechanism, because you will wear it out and it will become a dull, just like you don't have one knife I hope you don't have one knife in your kitchen. I hope you have more than one knife, because if you keep using it, then it'll become dull. Another analogy would be a good pair of black shoes, ladies. Hopefully you don't have one pair of black pumps, because they will easily be, well, not during 2020, because we were all in fuzzy socks, but under normal circumstances, they would easily be destroyed after a month or two if you're wearing black pumps that regularly. So you want to have more than one coping mechanism. You want to create a tool belt where you have a wrench and a level and a measuring a tape measure and a sprocket and hammer, and you want to have all the things that you need so that when you pull out a tool and you think will work and you find out, this is just not working. Like a bath is not working tonight. Let's try reading. Let's try candles. Let's try a weighted blanket, right? So you keep trying your tools. So I can share with you that one of my tools is a lot of what Monica King said. I also my husband uses CBD, which helps put him to sleep. I my practice sells CBD to patients and to the public. That helps with sleep. It helps with anxiety, bringing it down with no addiction or heightened effects, right? It just helps to bring your mood down. But when to seek treatment. So you have these coping strategies and you're using them. One of the reasons you should seek treatment is when the coping strategies you have aren't working for you, or you're having trouble using them, or you have good strategies and you want more, right? We can always add another tool to the tool belt. It doesn't harm anything because different problems and stressors require different tools. So every problem is not going to require a hammer, but sometimes you might need more than one tool to combat a problem. So make sure that if one of those things is happening, that you find a therapist so that you can start working on building a larger tool belt and responding to what these triggers are for you. I think that's all. That's all I have. Yeah.
I was muted. Thank you, Dr. Carter. Julie, you're up. You ready?
Yes, sorry, I know we're coming up against the end of our time tonight. This was such an important conversation to have. We're so glad to be a part of it. I wanted to let everyone know that we do have a workplace campaign called I Will Listen, where NAMI Metro Baltimore will come out and build a custom workshop schedule for your workforce. We talk about everything from anxiety and depression to racial trauma to COVID fatigue. And we really have some amazing empathy building workshops. We want to work to break down stigma, make sure that you know how to have a conversation with your managers, make sure your managers know how to respond to that conversation. I think we heard tonight from Ms. Janetta that that's not always the case. And so those conversations are led by an incredible network of volunteers with lived experience who come out and share their stories. And so we have this unique opportunity to have these really open and honest conversations. So if you're interested in that, we encourage you to reach out to us. We also always have a number of free resources for everyone. We have free support groups and classes for people living with mental health conditions and also family members of people living with mental health conditions. So NAMI's here for you. Please reach out to us, to our helpline, and we would love to support you in any way that we can.
I keep taking myself off mute, make sure I'm not talking. We're going to launch the poll now, but as we're launching the poll, I want to just, before we launch the poll, I want to do my closing remarks to make sure I do things in decency and order. As you see, based on this conversation, everyone that spoke, workplace mental health matters because it affects job performance and employee retention. Mental illness can cause disability, unemployment rates to rise, resulting in employees who are hired and trained but no longer be able to do their jobs. Workplace wellness programs can identify those at risk and connect them to treatment and put in place supports to help people reduce and manage stress. By addressing mental health issues in the workplace, employees can reduce healthcare costs for the businesses and employees. And it's a win-win for everyone when we do what's right. I want to do a special thank you to all my presenters and panelists for this candid conversation on mental health in the workplace, to the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Rose Mega Chapter, Baltimore, Maryland, Target 2, our health lead, Shawnee's Coleman, and all the health committee members and who helped with this presentation. To my special partners and mental health ambassadors, NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Health, supporting Greater Baltimore Urban League's Workforce Wednesday webinar series. We are so grateful to have you all here. Special and truly honored to have mental health ambassadors such as Janetta Churchill and Will Hug to share